The night sky over Iran lit up with fire. United States military aircraft and naval vessels unleashed a wave of precision strikes against Iranian targets, sending shockwaves through every capital on Earth. This was not a drill. This was not a warning shot. This was the United States military in full motion, executing orders signed by President Donald Trump himself. In an instant, the world changed. But why? What pushed the most powerful military force in human history to this moment? What calculations, fears, intelligence reports, and political pressures converged inside the White House to produce this decision? That is exactly what we're going to unpack today. Because this is not just a story about missiles and military targets. This is a story about power, consequences, and choices that will shape the next decade of global politics. Whether you live in Washington or anywhere else on this planet, what happened that night directly affects you. To understand why these strikes happened, you have to go back decades. The United States and Iran were once close allies, but everything changed in 1979 when the Islamic Revolution swept away the American-backed Shah and replaced his government with an anti-Western theocracy led by Ayatollah Khomeini. What followed shocked the world. Iranian students stormed the American embassy in Tehran and held 52 diplomats hostage for 444 days. That single event poisoned relations in ways that never fully healed. In the decades that followed, the two nations engaged in a relentless cycle of economic sanctions, covert operations, and proxy conflicts fought through armed groups across the Middle East. Every attempt at diplomacy eventually collapsed under the weight of deep mutual distrust. By the time Trump returned to office, the United States and Iran had spent nearly half a century treating each other as existential enemies. But to understand why tensions finally boiled over, we need to look at what Iran had been doing in the years and months leading up to the strikes. On the nuclear front, Iran had been making alarming progress. International inspectors reported that Iran was enriching uranium to levels dangerously close to weapons-grade material, far beyond what any peaceful energy program would require. The window for diplomatic solutions was narrowing fast. At the same time, Iran was aggressively expanding its influence across the Middle East through a network of proxy forces. Hezbollah in Lebanon remained one of its most powerful tools. Meanwhile, the Houthis in Yemen had been launching drone and missile attacks on commercial shipping lanes in Saudi Arabian territory, threatening regional stability. For Washington and its allies in Israel, Saudi Arabia, and beyond, this combination of nuclear advancement and proxy aggression created a threat picture that felt increasingly urgent and impossible to ignore. So what exactly pushed the Trump administration over the edge? According to senior officials and intelligence briefings, the final trigger was a convergence of alarming developments that Washington concluded could no longer be ignored. Intelligence agencies reportedly intercepted communications suggesting Iran was actively coordinating with proxy forces to target American military personnel stationed across the Middle East. Simultaneously, Iran had made significant moves at its nuclear enrichment facilities, crossing thresholds that analysts described as dangerously close to weapons-grade capability. Adding fuel to the fire, Iranian-backed Houthi forces had escalated attacks on critical shipping lanes in the Red Sea, directly threatening global commerce and American naval assets operating in the region. Officials described a specific credible threat window, a narrow period during which Iranian operatives were believed to be finalizing plans for imminent strikes against American interests. This combination, nuclear provocation, proxy aggression, and direct personnel threats, became the breaking point that transformed deliberation into action. With intelligence reports painting a dire picture, Trump convened his national security team for a series of intense closed-door meetings. Key figures including Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz each brought competing perspectives to the table. Military commanders presented strike options ranging from limited surgical hits to broader campaigns targeting multiple Iranian facilities simultaneously. The debates were sharp. Some advisors warned that military action risked triggering a wider regional war, potentially drawing in Iranian proxy forces across multiple fronts. Others argued that continued inaction had already emboldened Tehran, making future confrontation inevitable and costlier. Trump reportedly pressed his team hard on one central question: what happens if we do nothing? Analysts warned Iran could reach weapons-grade uranium enrichment within weeks. That calculus, sources suggest, ultimately tipped the balance. The risks of inaction, in Trump's judgment, outweighed the risks of striking first. In the early hours of the operation, United States Air Force B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, flying directly from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, carried out precision strikes against three of Iran's most significant nuclear facilities. The targets included Fordow, buried deep inside a mountain near Qom, Natanz, Iran's primary uranium enrichment complex, and Isfahan, home to key nuclear research infrastructure. Each site was struck using massive ordnance penetrator bombs, the most powerful bunker-busting munitions in the American arsenal, specifically designed to destroy deeply fortified underground structures. The strikes were coordinated alongside Israeli military operations targeting Iranian air defense systems. According to Pentagon briefings, the stated military objective was to significantly degrade Iran's ability to produce weapons-grade uranium and set back its nuclear program by years. Defense officials confirmed the missions were completed successfully, with all aircraft returning safely. No American casualties were reported in the immediate aftermath of the operation. With the strikes now carried out, the Trump administration moved quickly to explain its actions to the American public and the world. President Trump addressed the nation directly, stating the strikes were an act of self-defense, not aggression. He emphasized that Iran had been given every opportunity to negotiate and had chosen provocation instead. The Pentagon released a formal statement declaring the targets were carefully selected to degrade Iran's capacity to threaten American forces and regional stability, while minimizing civilian casualties. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth called the operation both legally sound and militarily precise, citing the president's constitutional authority as commander-in-chief and existing authorizations for the use of military force. National security officials argued the strikes were proportionate responses to documented imminent threats, not acts of war. The administration framed this not as the beginning of a conflict, but as a firm message that American restraint had its limits. Not everyone accepted the administration's justification at face value. Democratic lawmakers were among the loudest critics, with many arguing that Trump had bypassed Congress entirely, violating the War Powers Resolution by launching strikes without proper legislative authorization. Senator Tim Kaine called it a dangerous overreach of executive authority. International voices echoed similar concerns. Several European allies, while acknowledging Iran's destabilizing behavior, urged restraint and warned that military escalation risked triggering a broader regional war with unpredictable consequences. Legal scholars questioned whether the strikes met the threshold for legitimate self-defense under international law, arguing the administration's evidence of imminent threat remained vague and unverified. Foreign policy experts raised strategic objections too, warning that bombing Iran could harden hardliners in Tehran, collapse any remaining diplomatic channels, and push Iran closer to actually building a nuclear weapon rather than deterring that outcome. The criticism was sharp, widespread, and difficult to dismiss. The world did not stay silent for long. Within hours of the strikes being confirmed, Iran's supreme leader issued a defiant statement, vowing a decisive response and calling the attack an unforgivable act of aggression. Iranian state media reported military units being placed on high alert, and proxy forces across the region signaled readiness for retaliatory action. Russia condemned the strikes as a dangerous violation of international law, while China called for immediate de-escalation and urged all parties to exercise restraint. Traditional U.S. allies in Europe expressed deep concern, with several governments urging Washington to pursue diplomatic channels. On the economic front, oil prices surged nearly 8% within the first trading session, rattling global energy markets. The United Nations Security Council called an emergency session, reflecting just how sharply this single military decision had disrupted the fragile architecture of international stability that so many institutions depend upon daily. Stepping back from the immediate chaos, these strikes reveal something fundamental about how Trump approaches American power on the world stage. His foreign policy doctrine has always leaned toward maximum pressure, unpredictability, and decisive force over prolonged diplomacy. These strikes are that doctrine in its most concentrated form. For nuclear negotiations, the consequences are severe. Iran is unlikely to return to any bargaining table feeling rewarded for compromise when military strikes are the response to tension. Trust, already paper-thin, may now be completely shattered. The deeper question is whether this moment represents a genuine turning point or simply another chapter in a conflict that has resisted resolution for over 4 decades. History suggests caution. Previous escalations between Washington and Tehran produced neither decisive victory nor lasting peace. What we may be witnessing is not an ending, but an intensification of a standoff that both nations seem unable to escape and unwilling to truly resolve. So why did Trump order these strikes? The answer lies in a convergence of factors: decades of unresolved tension, a rapidly advancing nuclear program, escalating proxy threats, and a specific moment where the administration concluded that inaction carried greater risk than action. Trump saw an opportunity to project strength, reassert deterrence, and reshape the strategic landscape before conditions worsened further. But here is what remains deeply uncertain, whether these strikes will produce lasting security or simply ignite the next chapter of a conflict that has resisted resolution for over 40 years. Military force can destroy infrastructure, but it cannot eliminate ideology or political will. Every decision made in the Situation Room carries consequences that ripple far beyond the moment. Lives, alliances, and entire regional orders hang in the balance. The real question is not just whether the strikes were justified, but whether they bring us closer to stability or further from it. That answer, only time will reveal.